The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Panic from the Trump camp is growing over what is clearly a strengthening movement of electoral revolt against Donald Trump. Last week, on November 30th, I told you about a source that communicated to me that there were 15 Republican Trump electors that had quietly formed a coalition to revolt against Trump on December 19th and were also working on convincing other electors. On December 1st, that notion was confirmed to me by a well-placed and historically successful Democratic operative. And yesterday or the day before, I believe it was the day before, or was it yesterday? In any case, yesterday, I told you about a Republican Trump elector from Texas, Christopher Saprun, who said, I am an individual who is expected to vote for Trump on December 19th, and I will not be voting for Trump. This entire story continues to get oxygen and spread. Number one, we will talk through it. Politico reporting that advocates of this bid for an electoral revolt have been in contact with close allies of Hillary Clinton, according to multiple sources familiar with the discussions. Now, you might remember, and I told you this either last week or the week before, that the Clinton camp and the DNC both have refused to endorse these efforts spearheaded by, number one, groups of electors in Colorado and Washington state to revolt in the Electoral College. They have said after, I guess, during or after Jill Stein raised the money for at least some of the recounts, they said, we support the doing of recounts, but we're not alleging that there was voter fraud. We're not expecting the results to change, et cetera, et cetera. They now are taking briefings about what is upcoming potentially with this electoral revolt. In addition to that, we have a law firm offering free legal advice to electors that are considering revolting against Donald Trump. We heard about this from Lawrence Lessig, who's a Harvard Law School professor heading up the project. And he was interviewed by the Huffington Post and said that the law firm Dury Tangri is handling intake of electors that are considering voting in a different way than the popular vote in their state went. They may end up representing the elector I told you about yesterday, Christopher Saprun. And the idea here, Pat, is different states have different rules, as we've talked about what the punishments are, if any, for electors who choose to go in a different direction. Sometimes a misdemeanor, sometimes potentially $1,000 fine. And what the law firm is saying here is, if you're thinking about this, we will help you for free to figure out what might or might not happen. And that's very interesting.
Yeah, and these misdemeanors and fines would go on their record, presumably, but it would be for a noble cause, and I think very worth it.
This continues to also grow, as we now see in the New York Times, which published yesterday a piece in the opinion pages by Elizabeth Williamson outlining specifically how the Electoral College could dump Trump. And she talks about the legality of it. I won't sort of rehash that because we've talked about that many, many times, but she made three main points. Number one, and I don't think any of us are missing this, this is a very, very, very long shot. Number two, that after all, Republicans do control the House of Representatives, and that if somehow Donald Trump was denied the 270 electoral votes that he needs to become president of the United States, that ultimately the House of Representatives would more than likely still select Trump, and that if they didn't, it would not go to Hillary Clinton, because even if the 270 were denied to Trump, and even if the House of Representatives decided not to vote in Trump, it would be probably some other Republican, and we're really getting way, way, way ahead of ourselves. But the important thing here, Pat, and the fascinating thing is when this started on November 30th, with my source talking about 15 electors, there was very little discussion of this, almost no discussion whatsoever. And over time, our stories on this have gotten more and more attention. More and more articles have come out about it. And now this is a real discussion that is happening. The Clinton campaign is being briefed. There is growing concern from the Trump camp. This is a real thing that at least is being discussed.
Yeah, it's a story that's now starting to gain traction. And the interesting angle, too, is who are these electors going to vote for?
Yeah.
Who are they going to pick? I mean, presumably it's not going to be Hillary Clinton.
Right.
Who are they going to go with?
And that's where the speculation comes that you may see a combination of revolting Republican electors and potentially some revolting Hillary electors, all of whom say, let's vote for someone else. And every indication is that if that were to happen, it would be some other Republican. Who exactly, not totally clear. Kasich has said, don't vote for me. Some people talking about Mitt Romney. It's scary when Mitt Romney has become the sort of sane and rational choice. That's really, really crazy. But that's the America that we are in today. I want to talk briefly a story that a number of viewers said, David, you should really talk about this. And this relates to a requested recount in Florida in the presidential election results over a lawsuit. Now, I'm going to discuss it not because I believe that there was really great news from Florida, but because enough people in our audience have asked about it. And if a dozen people have emailed me about this, there are probably many, many more who also are curious about this. There are some, I would call them more partial websites talking about a lawsuit in Florida as a major development. That alleged voter fraud in Florida is triggering a recount, which might flip the results from Trump to Clinton. That is quite an exaggeration. What is happening is that 3 Florida voters have filed a lawsuit. They say that Donald Trump didn't really win the Florida presidential election. Why? Well, they say that it's because of hacking, malfunctioning voting machines, and other problems. Their demand is for a hand recount of every paper ballot in Florida. They may actually run out of time before this even gets going. An Orlando attorney who's representing these 3 plaintiffs, his name is Clint Curtis, said that the defendants may not even respond by the time that the Electoral College meets on December 19th. And he said that he has received a deluge of reports from voters across the state of problems on Election Day, people being turned away at the polls, people being told you've already voted, even though they believe that they haven't, and more of what the Florida Division of Elections calls minor issues. I think that it is really important, Pat, for progressives not to pay too much attention to this. The margin in Florida, the margin of victory for Trump was 112,000 votes. It is very unlikely that this recount is even going to get going. Even if a recount got going, if you really believe that there was hacking, you actually need an audit to uncover that. And a recount, even if it happens, which it probably won't, is insanely unlikely to change a 112,000 vote margin of victory.
And even if it did, Florida only has 29 electoral votes, which is far short of the 37 you would need to block Trump from getting the presidency.
Another good point.
You'd also have to pick up Pennsylvania or Wisconsin. It's a long shot, but I think it really just goes to the idea that Florida has to get it together. We've gone through these national embarrassments with that state before.
And when you look specifically at some of the counties in Florida, I know this is like a broken record, but the machines they use are the same machines that are used in some of the not contested officially, but reportedly sketchy counties in other important states like Michigan and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. So that voting machine thing continues to be in the background. My advice to progressives, don't hold your breath, because this is so unlikely to happen. And even if it does, I talked to you about the difference between a recount and an audit, and this was why when the entire Jill Stein recount thing got going, I didn't really have high hopes for it, because even if I believed that there had been something shady in those states and the exit poll data versus the reported voting data is at minimum raising some pretty fair questions. When you look at a recount, you're not actually following the path from the intention of a voter to cast a vote for candidate A all the way through the handling of the ballot to whether that person's intention was actually reflected in how the vote was counted. That is what an audit is. And that's not even what was being discussed, Pat. And I've been making this point like a broken record, and I think some people get it and some still don't.
I really wonder what the odds makers have for stopping Donald Trump. What method is more likely, an electoral revolt or the recounts going the opposite way?
I think the electoral revolt, as unlikely as it is the most likely path to stopping Trump. I don't think recounts and this type of lawsuit is actually going to make a difference. Okay, I've been talking about this for a while, and it's time. we need your help. The David Pakman Show needs your help. We have launched an Indiegogo crowdfunding campaign. You can access it by going to davidpakman.com/donate. This is a $60,000 campaign. This is the biggest campaign we've ever done. We need your help. I don't know how else to say it. We have some really big goals. This is by far the biggest potential that we have to fundamentally grow the influence, not just of the David Pakman Show. November 8th told us this is way bigger than the David Pakman Show. This is now about progressive activism and engagement. And at the top of the list for what we are looking to fund with this campaign is the creation of a progressive engagement coordinator. I've spoken to other independent progressive shows, and we have a sort of coalition of programs which could really benefit from organization in terms of what campaigns, what initiatives, what issues can all of our audiences work together on in 2017, in 2018, into the 2020 campaign, the census and redistricting. There's so much going on, but progressives need to be engaged. Low voter turnout in the 2016 election told us that progressives were not engaged enough. Lack of organization at the local and state level by progressives in many cases tells us that we are not coordinated and organized enough. So at the top of the list for this campaign, in terms of the goals, is the creation of a real progressive engagement coordinator. Now, in addition to that, we also have proposals in from a professional studio design company. A really professional guy came in and took all sorts of measurements in our studio and is sort of ready to bring our production to the next level, which is something that has a significant cost. And it relates to another really big initiative that we are in the middle of, which is we are working with Amazon Prime to finalize the technical requirements for putting the David Pakman Show on Amazon Prime. This is absolutely huge. It is not as big as it would be to be on Netflix, but Amazon Prime is really, really big right now, and putting the David Pakman Show on there would be a major accomplishment. It is a big enough project in and of itself that the technical and staff time requirements exceed our current capabilities. So that's another aspect in terms of technical and staff requirements that we are fundraising for. And then there's some other goals also, which you can check out at davidpakman.com/donate. Now, this can be done, okay? Even if you can only donate $2, don't think that it's not worth going to davidpakman.com/donate and donating the $2. Those small contributions make a big difference. If anything we learned from the Bernie Sanders campaign, it's that small contributions from many people make all the difference in the world. So whether it's $2 or $3 or $4, whatever you can contribute, don't skip it because you think it won't make an impact. It takes 1 minute, or at the most, if you have an Indiegogo account already, it takes even less time, to make a donation at davidpakman.com/donate, and every donation of every size is going to help. We've got great perks lined up, everything from David Pakman Show bumper stickers to David Pakman Show t-shirts to the signed 2017 David Pakman Show calendars to the flash drives being back. You'll remember about a year ago, we had a promo where we offered David Pakman Show 32 gigabyte flash drives, and they've not been available since. That is a premium only available through the crowdfunding campaign. And what I think a lot of people really are going to be into, Pat, at the higher levels, we have perks that will allow you to co-host the David Pakman Show. We've never done this before, and I am fascinated and potentially horrified, but also cautiously optimistic that that's going to lead to some really cool things.
And to some extent, you'd have your choice of stories, too. We wouldn't give you free reign, but it would be kind of up to you.
You would almost be like co-host and associate producer for either a bonus show or a broadcast show segment. So please do not skip the donation because you feel like you can't donate enough to make a difference. Whatever you can donate makes a difference. Also, we have a referral contest. The top 5 referrers of donors, which is tracked by the campaign, will get our $299 perk called the Total Package for free. Okay, there's 5 of those available. All you have to do is go to davidpakman.com/donate, and sort of at the top right of the campaign page, you will see Twitter and Facebook share buttons. When you use those buttons to share the campaign, our system tracks donations that come from your referrals, and the top 5 referrers will get the $299 perk for free. We will ship the stuff to you wherever you are in the world. That'll be the restriction. If you're on another planet, I can't help you with the shipping, but we will take care of the shipping cost wherever you are on planet Earth. davidpakman.com/donate. If you have questions, let me know. If you have perk ideas, let me know. Let's make this happen. Today is day 1. Thanks to some early donors, we are already over the $2,000 mark. We've not even started. When you are hearing me talk about this right now, we've not even started. This is the start, and we've already raised 2 of the $60,000 we're looking to raise. Let's do it with peace and love, as I like to say. Send me your thoughts. I'm on Twitter at @dpakman.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new member of the day is Lawrence Jordan. Lawrence, or Larry, please, please, please accept my sincere thank you for being a David Pakman Show member. You are the reason the show exists and continues to grow. You can sign up at davidpakman.com/membership. Of course, the coupon code IVoted17 is available to you. And quickly, I'll mention, if you ever shop on Amazon, you can support the work that we do by going to davidpakman.com/Amazon before you shop. And please don't miss the Indiegogo fundraiser that we are doing at davidpakman.com/donate, thinking really big about the future of the David Pakman Show and progressive activism. Let's get into Hatriot Mail. I know many of you anxiously waiting for this week's Hatriot Mail.
If Ayn Rand and Ronald Reagan had a baby and suckled that child off the teat of liberty, its cries would sound a little something like Hatriot Mail, written by patriots who hate David Pakman, because America, and because freedom.
Some weeks I have a little bit of an intro or preparation for you for Hatriot Mail. This week I can provide no such thing. I will just play it for you and see if we can figure it out.
David, I've never watched your show before, and I can say after watching this video that I will never watch your show again. The amount of stupidity you have for the real world is just mind-blowing. Please do yourself a favor and learn everything about a subject before talking about it. If this information gathering process becomes a routine of yours, then I might consider watching your show again. David sounds like sort of the worst of sort person.
David sort of sounds like the worst sort of person. I like that. I don't know exactly what they meant, but the silver lining here is at least this Hatriot said they'd be willing to check the show out again if I do exactly what it is that they are saying. Hatriots often have many, many demands. They would be willing to check the show out again. And for that, I think we should applaud that.
I thought the message was coherent, at least at first, and then it kind of trailed off.
Pat's bar for Hatriot Mail is, if I can even remotely understand what it is the Hatriot is talking about, it's really not that bad. And generally, given what we've seen, I think I do have to agree. Remember, you can turn Hatriot Mail into something positive with the membership coupon code Hatriot40. Every time you use the coupon code Hatriot40 at davidpakman.com/membership, a Hatriot cries. That's what I've read on Reddit, on the same forum where people discuss Pizzagate, and I believe it to be true. I have to talk to you about this scam deal that Donald Trump did with Carrier and its parent company, United Technologies. Now, the background is already a major scam. The big news was, I'm Trump, I negotiated that Carrier will keep 1,000 jobs in Indianapolis instead of moving them to Mexico. In and of itself, it was already a scam because there was a plan to move 2,000 jobs from Indiana to Mexico, meaning that Trump's major negotiations and giving millions of dollars to Carrier still was going to lead to 1,000 of those 2,000 jobs going to Mexico. In addition, what Donald Trump did is a completely unsustainable solution. You can't just go and negotiate with every company and give them money And it's the opposite of a free market solution because it does not change anything fundamentally about the business environment in which we are operating. You're just going to a company and saying, here, take money to stay. But we've now learned that it is an even bigger scam than I thought. And believe me, I thought it was a pretty damn big scam. Number one, it turns out that the 1,000 jobs that were going to be kept in Indianapolis, or maybe it was supposed to be 1,100, doesn't matter because it's not that big. It's 750 union jobs, according to the media communications rep who commented on CNN earlier today named TJ Bray. He said we were told it would be 1,000 or 1,100 jobs. It's going to be 750 union jobs that are actually being kept here. But here is where it really gets completely nuts. Greg Hayes is the CEO of United Technologies. That's the parent company of Carrier. He admitted that this deal that Donald Trump struck with them will ultimately lead to fewer jobs in Indiana. Why? I mean, you can't write this stuff, Pat. By keeping the plant in Indiana for now, that gives Carrier more money to do stuff with. And as a result of the deal that Trump made, Carrier is going to start a $16 million investment to drive down the cost of production in order to reduce the cost gap with operating in Mexico. In other words, it's much cheaper to run the business in Mexico, but Carrier, with the money Trump is giving them, that Trump is having the government give them, they are going to invest the money in driving down the cost of production in the United States. How are they going to do that? Automation. What does that mean? That Trump's big victory is going to lead to jobs being replaced by machines. This is a transcript from CNBC's show Mad Money with Jim Cramer. And Greg Hayes said, right, well, and again, if you think about what we talked about last week, we're going to make a $16 million investment in that factory in Indianapolis to automate, to drive the cost down so that we can continue to be competitive. Now, is it as cheap as moving to Mexico with lower cost of labor? No, but we will make that plant competitive just because we'll make the capital investments there. Jim Cramer says, right, to which Greg Hayes adds, but what that ultimately means is there will be fewer jobs. That's right. Carrier is taking the money that they got in this major successful negotiation that Trump did and putting it into automating away the American jobs that Trump is taking credit for saving. This is the biggest scam, sham, freak show of smoke and mirrors from Donald Trump that we've seen so far in his very early tenure, currently just president-elect. It's a total sham.
Yeah, we've long suspected that this would just kind of be a victory on optics, and you're only saving 1,000 jobs to begin with.
Yeah.
Now it seems that those jobs are going to end up being replaced anyway by automation, and it really just goes to the point that people get so upset with their jobs going to low-wage workers in developing countries.
Right.
Really, they're targeting the wrong enemy there.
Absolutely. Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, neither of them talking about job automation is a serious problem during the 2016 campaign. Yeah, keep the jobs here, move them to Mexico or not. We won, they won. It's making America great again. They're investing the money in replacing the jobs with machines. Everyone from the liberal economist Paul Krugman to Republican Senator Ben Sasse is regularly discussing the undeniable reality that technological developments are a much bigger threat to American workers than trade, even though Donald Trump has been super successful at making trade the enemy. And the people that voted for Trump, thinking that he's going to bring jobs back that have left, are operating under the assumption that that's possible. That's only even possible in the short term if Trump just starts giving money to companies to keep jobs in the United States in a completely anti-free market way, at taxpayer expense, by the way. It is a total and utter joke. Smoke and mirrors is actually what the reality of Trump's so-called victories are. I want to talk about German Chancellor Angela Merkel, who is now calling for a burqa ban in Germany. The backstory of this was our discussion about, with Trump being elected president of the United States, who is going to be the so-called leader of the free world? It's not going to be Trump, that's for sure. It's pretty embarrassing to have Donald Trump as president. And we speculated that German Chancellor Angela Merkel might be a pretty good choice in terms of who would be seen as the leader of the free world. She has now formally endorsed a full burqa ban. And some speculation is that this is a sort of PR counter to the backlash for being seen as lenient on immigration policies in Germany. And she made these comments at a Christian Democratic Union conference. She recently also declared that she's seeking re-election. And even that re-election is being considered as a possible reaction to the election of Donald Trump in the United States. And she said to a big group at this event, to a large round of applause, the full veil must be banned wherever it is legally possible. Now, you'll remember that 6 years ago, in 2010, France passed a burqa ban. It bans the wearing of face-covering headgear. It's not just the burqa. It includes masks. It includes helmets. It includes balaclavas and niqabs and other veils covering the face in public places, except under specific circumstances. That ban also applies to the burqa, understandably, if it covers the face. Now, arguments in favor of a burqa ban are, it's not religious freedom to conceal your identity in public, and it's actually a risk for crime to enter public places anonymously. It's cultural, not religious, and therefore it doesn't infringe on anyone's right to believe what they want to believe religiously. Although the counter argument to that is that the way you're dressed is part of the free practice of religion. And also that the burqa is a religious item, and thus banning it is not freedom of religion, is one of the big arguments against banning the burqa. Now, many hate the burqa because it represents control by men over women in Islam. The counter to that, though, Pat, is that if you tell women you can't wear this, you're also controlling women's bodies, aren't you?
Yeah, I guess it's a catch-22 in that sense. I mean, I'm pretty split on this, just coming from a more American perspective of having freedom of religion, having that long tradition. But, you know, it goes both ways. I'm on the fence about it.
This is something a lot of our viewers are actually on the fence about. And there's no doubt that there's no way someone should be able to enter a bank with their face covered. It just makes absolutely no sense. You go into a bank, people have to know who you are. Any situation where you have to show ID, you can't go in with your face covered. You just can't. You need to be able to confirm that the person on the ID is the person that's there. The argument in public, out on the street, is much more difficult to make. But you could pass a law that says in particular situations, all face coverings must be lifted. It doesn't matter whether it's a mask or a helmet or a religious item. This includes airport security. This includes banks. This might include retail stores, wherever. I just don't know that that's a solution, because the biggest debate here is over oppressive ideology. The idea that, well, sometimes women make the choice. They want the burqa, but are they making that choice in a way that is already based on an oppressive ideology that has been ingrained into them? It ignores, though, that women do have a right to dress however they want, if that's how they truly want to. But many shows have talked about this. Just because a woman says they want the burqa, is it disrespectful to women to say, you don't really want it? You only think you want it because men told you want it. Either way, you can make a pretty compelling case.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? Do they actually believe in the brainwashing, or are they just trying to appease the men in their lives?
The real issue is not actually about the logistics of the burqa ban. As I mentioned, you could say people can dress however they want, but there are certain scenarios where you cannot wear a face covering. You must be identifiable. That can be done. It's more about what the burqa ban is code for and how politically advantageous it might be for Angela Merkel, given the perception of her being weak on immigration. The conversation about the merits and failings of a burqa ban, the logistics of it, relevant, important, but the real issue here for Angela Merkel is the blowback to her being perceived as weak on immigration. Send me your thoughts on this, and let's get a discussion going about it on our discussion forum at davidpakman.com/Reddit.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
It is so great to be joined today by Miguel Robles-Duran, who is Associate Professor of Urbanism at the New School Parsons School of Design and co-founder of the nonprofit Cooperative for Socio-Spatial Development, Cohabitation Strategies, based in New York City and in Rotterdam. Miguel, it's so great to talk to you. We've been analyzing the 2016 election results through an economic lens, rich, middle class, and poor. We've been analyzing it through educational lenses and in so many ways. But one of the clearly growing divides in the United States is that between rural, suburban, and urban cities. And in fact, Donald Trump many times talking about inner cities and using the word urban and talking about non-white groups almost interchangeably in a way that was actually a little bizarre, but maybe that's getting us a little away from what we want to talk to today. How important is this lens of the divide between where people live in the U.S.?
Yeah, no, it's quite a dramatic situation that we're facing today. I mean, as we have been reading since the election and happened until today, there's been a lot of articles that relate to that situation as the urban-rural divide, and I also want to emphasize that you also did was a suburban divide, which I think it's even more important than the other two for the case of the election. Now, on one hand, we have a situation where, yes, there's a call for a network of, should I say, rebel cities or sanctuary cities. Right now, I think we have already around 35. I mean, there's a series of cities that are already engaging in sanctuary spaces. And of course, clearly, as we know, 35 of the largest cities in the U.S. Beat Trump by a big margin, 59%. And then you have a situation where there's a polarization happening, which we've never seen for a very long time. Perhaps it's the first time that we see a polarization of such dimensions. The big issue that we see, or that I see on this, has to do with emphasizing that cities continue to be sort of like these spaces where we harbor some kind of progressive politics, but at the same time we continue to abandon, and as we have for many, many years, the rural and the suburban spaces, which are very much codependent with urban centers, right? So the situation today is actually quite unique, and we're battling on how to deal with that.
So one thing that I think would be interesting to get your thoughts on would be sort of a which came first. In your analysis, does it appear as though if you grow up in a rural area, for example, you are more likely to end up being more politically conservative and voting for Republican candidates? Or is it that if you are already predisposed based on parents or whatever else to be conservative, that you ultimately find your way to more rural areas? Do you have a sense of that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a very long history on the suburbanization of the United States, and I want to emphasize that McCarthy, I mean, the guy behind McCarthyism, was very much engaged in the promotion of the development of Levittown, which is considered to be one of the first suburban towns in the United States.
Yeah, Bill O'Reilly's hometown.
Yeah, and he argued to Congress that they needed a capitalist mode of basically of living vis-a-vis what the Russians and other socialist countries in Europe were proposing, which were more collective forms of living. His argument was that in a suburbia you can be divided in a way that you don't interact with your neighbors. It's less of an issue of organizing. And the focus on this would be, of course, consumption, right? And many of other things. And so the ideology really played a very big role in the definition of what suburban America is. So we can go from there. Of course, we can go to the 19th century and so on. But I think in the United States, it's very telling that that idea of individualism is very tailored to the territorial sort of definition, on how people engage in their daily lives. It's less contact, right? On the other hand, you have the urban spaces, right, which is normally, I mean, of course, we call New York, San Francisco is very compact, but in general, you have a much more daily experience of the other, right? And therefore, your sense of daily life becomes quite adapted to the experience of the other, and most certainly understanding the other position, right? In suburban environments, you have much less contact with people, and therefore it's an obvious, result, from this.
When we look at cities, two growing issues, and one I discussed recently, there was a very interesting article, I think it was in The Atlantic, talking about the increasing unaffordability of liberal cities in the United States. I'd love for you could pick either or both of these and sort of tell me which direction you want to go in first. Affordable housing in cities and or zoning in big cities. Which of these do you think is more important to sort of think about in terms of how it relates to politics and different populations and how they're distributed in the United States?
Yeah, I mean, this, of course, targets, I mean, if we want to extend to this election sort of topic, I mean, it targets a lot what are the big issues within cities today. I mean, most cities right now in the United States, the large cities, are impossible actually to be able to live in. I tell my friends, if you want to come to New York City, you might want to be sure of what's your salary, and your salary, you're talking about six-figure salaries, to be able to live even a more like decent, life over here. The prices of housing continue to rise, and this has to do a lot with the speculative factor that cities have been aiding, developers in pushing. There's this big discussion today about that supply and demand will solve the situation and let developers, for example, continue building affordable housing. But we always argue that supply and demand never works. I mean, never works ever, but especially in the housing issue, because housing is normally treated in this economy as a commodity. So it's not a matter of supplying housing for those that need it. It's a matter of supplying housing for the investors, for those that want to speculate on the housing. And meantime, those that need it don't have enough housing to address. And so most of the contemporary ways or dilemmas on reaching affordability, which have to do with zoning or putting other programs like 421A or some other policies that have to do with fiscal incentives to developers, continue to emphasize the idea that it's to promote speculation, all of them, including zoning and so forth. It seems to me that we need a very radical restructuring on how we think housing, especially on the context of cities, but also, as I want to say, I don't want to polarize, the suburban and rural areas, which are also very dependent on the prices here. You can see, for example, in city centers like New York, you have right now most of the rural areas upstate now increasing in prices, making it even less affordable for those that were thinking of moving forward, or moving to a different area that is more affordable. So we have a conundrum. And right now with Ben Carson in charge of all of these, I think we can just see an exacerbation of all these politics, especially because they're going to be pushing it towards more privatization and more the idea that housing is a commodity and it's not meant for people to live in. It's meant for as a currency, right? So to accumulate.
When one of the areas in which, at least at face value, it seems that progressives might overlap with President-elect Donald Trump is on the idea of significant infrastructure spending. Now, if we for a second put aside the specifics of how Donald Trump would do the infrastructure spending is the same type of status quo crony capitalism that we've seen for a long time. Let's just temporarily ignore that for our conversation. If there were to be significant infrastructure spending done in cities, what in particular do you think could be done to increase the amount of affordable housing and or deal with the increasing lack of affordability in these cities? How could that money be spent?
Yeah, I mean, whether any regime, if I should say, I mean, whether it would have been Clinton or Bernie or in this case Donald Trump, we would be facing with infrastructure spending. Of course, you raise the property values. If you build a decent park or a decent bridge or more public transportation systems, clearly there's going to be a demand from those that speculate on property or those that want to move to a better place. Let's say that it's more to their liking. So in my opinion and the opinion of several of my peers, I mean, there's only one way to go forward with these, and these would be to structure different policies that enable different kinds of speculation. And I want to call a specific type of speculation, which is a predatory form of speculation, which is the norm at this point. You buy something for $500,000 one year and then you sell it the next year for $1 million, which is crazy. In New York, we have seen things that are just unbelievable, the rise of prices and the way that these predatory speculators operate. So as long as we don't have policies that break or that somehow balance, either through fiscal incentives, either to the promotion of collective property, which is the one that I favor a lot, community land trust formations, which Bernie Sanders experienced a lot in Vermont, and he was very engaged in this, which is forms of property that cannot be speculated upon. That basically you buy the house and then you can sell the house just with inflationary rates on top, but not anything extra. And those type of housing sort of schemes get into that idea that housing is a right, and it's not something that we can trade upon in a way that any normal commodity should be done. So in our principle, I know it sounds very radical, but there needs to be different laws that break or policies, the amount of speculation that is going on. And this is, again, independent of if it's Trump or Clinton or Bernie Sanders, right? These will continue to happen.
Incredibly important issue, and one that we're going to continue following: the growing socio-political divide between rural, urban, and suburban areas. Miguel, thanks so much for talking to us about this today.
Thank you very much, David. It was a pleasure being on the show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
A Virginia school has temporarily banned two classic books, To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee and Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain, because a parent said that her high school-age son was negatively impacted by the racial slurs contained in the books. The parent, whose son is biracial, said that her concerns are, quote, not even just a black and white thing, saying, I keep hearing this is a classic, this is a classic. I understand this is a literature classic, but at some point I feel that children will not or do not truly get the classic part, the literature part, which I'm not disputing. This is great literature, but there are so many racial slurs in there and defensive wording that you can't get past that. And she said that her son was reading Huckleberry Finn for a high school assignment and couldn't get past a certain page because the N-word appeared 7 times in it. Racial slurs appear 219 times in Huckleberry Finn and 48 times in To Kill a Mockingbird. As a result, Accomack County Public Schools Superintendent Chris Holland said that the district has temporarily suspended the books and appointed a committee to recommend whether the books should remain in the curriculum and in high school libraries. I think most in our audience know what my thought is on this. This is absolutely terrible. I recall reading books in school that contained the N-word and other racial slurs, certainly in 4th grade when I was 9 to 10 years old, but maybe even earlier. We're talking about a high school here. There was never a question about whether these words were okay to say. There was never a question about the difference between when the books were taking place and when we were reading it. And you might say, well, David, you're not black, so you heard the N-word and you weren't affected by it because it wasn't about your group. When studying World War II and the Holocaust in many classes, there was no shortage of readings that contained horrible slurs and statements about Jews, a group that I am a part of. And it was notable to say, at the time we said, we understand what this is. We aren't going to cancel these readings because that would be a disservice to the students. We're going to talk about the fact that these are horrible things to say. And banning books doesn't work out well, neither does burning them, by the way. I am completely against this decision, Pat.
Yeah, and it's also important to point out that the themes of these books are against racism, against slavery, and the characters use the N-word and other racial slurs in order to elicit a certain response against them. That's the whole point. And this mother saying that the books accept that language just isn't true.
I absolutely agree with you. And I want to mention something else. In particular, in this particular case, you've got a lot of right-wingers saying, oh, this is left-wing, trigger warning, safe space, politically correct nonsense, and this is a problem of the left. Don't forget that when the right wants to ban books because they go against conservative ideology, because they don't include God in discussions of science, or because of descriptions of sexual acts or being used for sexual education purposes, and they don't align with religious conservatism, the right does the same thing, saying, no, 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 my kids can't handle this, ban these books. This is just another version of it. And this time, Pat, it's the right-wingers saying it's the lefties who are wrong. But the right is also very much involved in the banning of material they don't want, often for so-called religious reasons.
Yeah, and then they go around saying that they're never against any restrictions on free speech and censorship, and they're not for safe spaces, all this stuff.
It's absolutely bogus. It's a double standard, but I am completely against this. I think that those books absolutely need to be. I mean, we're talking about high school. This was something that in my 4th grade class we were reading. Not these specific books, but books with this equivalent level of racial slurs and profanity. And we're talking about high school students here. There's a very interesting new study called Chronic Low-Calorie Sweetener Use and Risk of Abdominal Obesity Among Older Adults. This is by Chia, Shardell, Tanaka, and others. And what this study looked at was, let's look at people who use low-calorie sweeteners instead of sugar. And let's look at whether that's actually something that correlates with more effectively controlling weight measured by abdominal obesity. And what the study did, it was a longitudinal study. It looked at thousands and thousands of measurements and food diary records with detailed information on sugar versus low-calorie sweetener consumption, et cetera, et cetera. They had a median follow-up time of 10 years. I won't get into every detail about the study, but needless to say, we are linking to it and you can check it out. And what the study determined was that low-calorie sweetener use was independently associated with heavier relative weight, a larger waist, and a higher prevalence and incidence of abdominal obesity, suggesting that low-calorie sweetener use may not be an effective means of weight control relative to sugar use. Now, number one, correlation versus causation. One might read the study and say, oh, well, you use low-calorie sweeteners instead of sugar, and you end up heavier or more overweight. That's not what the study is saying. What it's saying is that those who use low-calorie sweeteners instead of sugar tend to have a higher BMI or be more obese. But that isn't necessarily because of the sweetener use, right? And the study says that they controlled for other variables, because what we really need to determine is, are individuals who are already heavier, more obese, more likely to use low-calorie sweeteners than sugar, but that's not actually why they are obese. So that's, I think, a very, very fair question. But my thing has always been, Pat, use a little sugar or get used to not using sugar. So like, for example, with coffee, I used to put quite a bit of sugar in my coffee. And my mom, for example, uses a ton of artificial sweetener. And I said, you know, it doesn't really make sense to me. I think I'm just going to start putting in less sugar into my coffee. And I got used to that. And now I don't drink coffee with sugar at all. That seems more logical to me than just making things super sweet with artificial sweeteners, which many of which have been shown to not be healthy.
I think a lot of people just go to these options, things like diet soda, Splenda, Equal, because they think it's the healthier alternative.
Yeah.
And their doctors may tell them to embrace a low sugar diet, and they think, well, you know, I don't have to give up these drinks that I like. I can still continue to have them.
It can still be sweet.
Healthier.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And we saw this phenomenon with the so-called low-fat snack craze, where you had cookies that were low-fat, but instead had other chemicals in them, where you saw other types of snacks that were low-fat, potato chips that were low-fat, et cetera, et cetera. Number one, it's unclear that the replacement of those fats with chemicals and other substances is not worse for you. And additionally, we know that people tend to overindulge in foods that they perceive to be healthier. So you know, I don't remember if it was Snackwell's or what experiment was done, some kind of low-fat cookie. And people would just eat way, way more because they were like, hey, it's low fat. I can eat twice as much.
Yeah, I think it's more of a marketing thing than in any interest in protecting people's health.
Yep, I totally agree with you. And very, very similar findings. Bottom line, if you're having a weight issue, it's far healthier to, for example, ditch the soda altogether than switching from 2 Cokes a day to 2 Diet Cokes a day. If you are looking to reduce the amount of sugar you're consuming, I would say get used to stuff being not as sweet as opposed to switching to Equal or Splenda or whatever artificial sweetener it is that you're using. And the science does seem to bear that out. We have a voicemail number. The number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Apparently, I created a day that doesn't exist. Take a listen to this.
Silly David Pakman, there is no November 31st. I I totally agreed with your show tonight on Tuesday, and I agree with you as far as the mental retardation that the Eggman thinks is politically correct. It's actually medically correct, and I have to take your side on that.
Thank you.
Great show. Love watching it. You have a good life.
All right, thank you. You have a good life as well. That's an interesting sign-off. I've never heard that before. Unless you're angry with someone. The only time I've ever heard someone say, have a good life, is if you plan to angrily never speak to that person again. But in any case, yes, I was so flummoxed and fired up about my story earlier this week about the elector revolt that I incorrectly referred to November 31st as the date where I broke the elector revolt story. That is not a day that exists. I meant November 30th.
Maybe it's all just the conspiracy and you never actually covered the story, and that's
right.
how you tried to cover it up.
By mentioning a date. Yeah, go look at our uploads from November 31st and you'll see everything that I meant to tell you on that day. We have a great bonus show for you today. Google says it will run entirely on renewable energy next year. A 15-year-old boy has been charged with the decapitation of a school classmate. And we're going to talk to you about 5 people close to Donald Trump who have spread fake news over the last few months. Remember, davidpakman.com/membership is the only way to get instant access to the bonus show. You can use coupon code IVoted17 for a major discount off of membership, and the Indiegogo crowdfunding campaign is on. Please take a look at what we're doing at davidpakman.com/donate. It's absolutely huge. It's going to be tremendous, but we need your help.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.